Well, happy Easter, and I guess also happy April Fool's Day. As I was reminded this morning, someone told me that right after they said nice sermon. I don't know if I should take that the wrong way, but I'm really not into April Fool's Day, never have been. I'm sort of like, what the Bible says, let your yes be yes, let your no be no, but let me try this morning. I'm glad you're here. We're going to have a 5-minute sermon. You can decide which part of that might possibly be a joke. I truly am glad you're here, by the way. Let me ask you a question. If you were given the opportunity, what might you say to your loved ones before you passed away? What would you say to them? Would you give words of encouragement? Would you have words of instruction? Would you have some final wish? What would you say if you were given the opportunity to tell your loved ones something before you passed on? Would you be like the guy, maybe you heard this story before, the guy who had worked his whole life so hard and he loved his money and he was greedy and selfish and he knew death was coming soon and he told his wife, he said, here's what I want you to do. Here's my death wish. I want you to take all of my money and I want you to put it in the casket with me because I'm going to take it with me. He said, will you do that? She's like, I don't know. And he said, no, you have got to do that. That money is mine. I earned it. I'm going to take it with me. And so after quite a long time, he pressured her and she said, yes, I'll do it. Okay. Well, the time came and her husband died and he was in the casket and she was at the service sitting next to one of her close friends. And at the end of the service, before the funeral workers were going to close the casket, she got up from her seat. And she had a little shoebox in her hand. And she went and she actually put it inside the coffin with her husband. And then they closed it up. Her friend next to her said, what are you doing? What are you doing? She said, I promised that I would put the money there. I'm a good Christian. I keep my word, so that's what I did. She said, you mean to tell me that you put all his money in there with him? She said, yes. I took all of his money, I put it into my account, and I wrote him a check. For some of you, maybe at lunch, that will make sense. I guess if we were going to update that story, maybe it was a gift card she put in there. I don't know. Apple Pay on his phone. I don't know how to update that. What would you say, though, if you knew you were about to die? Would you want to pass on a blessing to others? Or, like this man, would you be a burden to them? Would your words somehow not bless them? Would they be a burden to them? In the Gospel of John, chapters 14, 15, and 16, we have what has been called Jesus' farewell discourse. It is basically Jesus saying goodbye to his loved ones. He is giving his disciples some instructions. He is giving them a message of hope. He is telling them to be prepared. He is about to leave them. Now the question is, as his disciples, what do they hear? Do they hear words of blessing, or do they hear words that are a burden to them? First of all, before we can answer that question, I think we need to back up a little bit and just look at it from the disciples' perspective. Jesus is saying farewell to them. That is not on their radar. His disciples are not prepared for his departure. They are not prepared for him to say, I'm leaving you. After all, he is the long-awaited Messiah. He shouldn't be going anywhere. We have waited for generations for the Messiah to come. We are about to inaugurate the restored kingdom of Israel back to prominence. He's not going anywhere. And some of his disciples were even positioning themselves so that they could have prominent places as the kingdom was being unveiled in the world. Maybe we could sit at your right or your left. Maybe we could be your vice presidents, Jesus, as you bring about the kingdom of Israel back to its place of prominence. What do you mean, departure? What do you mean, farewell? This was to be a coronation of Jesus, not a separation from Jesus. And yet Jesus has a different message for them. John chapter 16, verse 16, Jesus went on to say, "In a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me." At this, some of his disciples said to one another, "What does he mean by saying, 'In a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me'? And because I am going to the Father." They kept asking, "What does he mean by a little while? We don't understand what he is saying." Just stop for a moment and imagine how Jesus' disciples must have felt as they tried to wrap their minds around Jesus' words. The one who had led them, the one who had provided for them, the one that they had seen do these miraculous things, the one on whom they had placed their hopes, their dreams, their futures. Now he's about to leave them in a little while? Their lives were by far not easy, but they knew their futures were secure with Jesus. And now that the kingdom had this momentum, and now they were going to Jerusalem. Why would he allow this to happen? Why would he leave? Why would God allow this to happen? There's a question we sometimes ask. Jesus' disciples must certainly have been confused and afraid. And on top of that, throughout Jesus' farewell, which is in John 14 through 16, Jesus seems to almost confirm their fears. He says, life is going to be difficult. You will face opposition. There will be persecution. In fact, some of the last words Jesus says to his followers are these. In John 16, verse 33, "In this world, you will have trouble." Boy, now there is an undeniable, unquestionable, irrefutable truth that each and every one of us knows to be true, don't we? As I look around this room this morning, I know there are so many living stories bearing witness to this truth, that in this world there is trouble. And for some of you, it's trouble in the form of the loss of a loved one. Maybe a loss that came way too early, way too tragic. For others, it's trouble in the form of marital problems and family conflict. For others, it's job loss. For others, it's sickness and cancer and other diseases that take away our minds and our bodies. For others, it's being mistreated by people you trusted. It's injustice, it's struggle, it's pain, it's suffering. In this world, we will have trouble. And because we know this, because we know this world isn't as it should be or as it will be, we tend to be afraid, to worry, to be filled with anxiety. Be honest. Does fear sometimes hold you captive? Are you sometimes held captive by your fears? After all, there is so much in our world to fear, isn't there? There is so much to be afraid of. As grandparents and parents, we think about the world our kids are growing up in, and it scares us. We think about all the things that are happening in our world. We think about terrorists and crazed gunmen who come into schools and businesses and churches. We are afraid of getting sick. We are afraid of the unknown future. Sometimes we fear for our government's leaders, and sometimes we fear our government's leaders. There's so much to worry about. We worry about the stock market. We worry about our retirement disappearing. So often we live in fear. And we find ourselves much like Jesus' disciples after he left them, after he was taken from them and was crucified. Do you remember where they are? John 20 tells us that they are basically huddled together behind locked doors. Why? Because they're afraid. They're afraid of the Jewish leaders. They're afraid of what's going to happen to them. They are afraid of the unknown future in front of them. And so often, that's exactly how we live our lives. huddled behind locked doors in fear. You see, fear and anxiety are byproducts of a broken world. The world isn't as it should be. And because of that, we know there's trouble. We experience trouble. We see others around us experience trouble. And it scares us. We're afraid. Someone has said that living with anxiety is like being followed by a voice that knows our greatest insecurities and uses those against us. And so often it's the loudest voice we hear. And I would suggest maybe that's the voice of Satan. And so we have this fear and this anxiety, and we allow that to be the place from which we function and make decisions and view the world, and we allow that fear to impact our relationships and our decisions. And we don't ask things like, what is God doing in this moment, in this place, in our world, in my life? What does God want from me? How can I step out in faith? We don't ask those types of questions very often. The questions we ask are, how can I remain safe? How can I be comfortable? How can I avoid getting out of any type of difficult situation, or getting into a difficult situation, getting out of my comfort zone? How can I maintain the status quo? You see, fear often keeps us from stepping out in faith. It forces us to try to control things, because if I can control it, then I can predict it. And if I can predict it, I don't have to fear it. So much of our fears are based on the unknown. And so if I can just control the situation, if I can control the relationship, then I know what's going to happen. And I don't have to be afraid. And so let me ask you this morning, what are you most afraid of? I'm not talking about spiders and snakes and heights and clowns or whatever else. I'm talking about what keeps you awake at night. What do you worry about? What do you dread the most? For many of us, if we're totally honest, the answer is probably death. Maybe our death, maybe the death of those around us. And sometimes the closer we get to that certainty, death, the more we allow it to scare us. Well, think about Jesus' disciples. Death was certainly a very real fear and reality for them. But you need to understand what Jesus is really telling them. And not just telling them, but I think telling us. Because in his farewell, yes, he says to them, you will have trouble. But that's not the end of the story. There is so much more to it than that. In fact, there's more to that verse than that one statement. Back in John 16:33, I have told you these things, Jesus says, so that in me you may have peace. Not fear, not anxiety, not worry, but peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. That is wonderful news. That is a truth and a reality that we need to embrace every day, especially when we are facing trouble and suffering and pain. Jesus says, take heart, have courage, be strong, because I have overcome this world that is filled with trouble. But for his disciples, imagine what they are hearing. Jesus, you just said that we have peace in you, but you also said you're leaving us. That doesn't make sense. How can we have peace in you if you're going to be gone? You see, that's the whole point. That's the whole point that they were missing and that we often overlook in our lives. And so Jesus makes it very clear. Back in our text, verse 20. Very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come, But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of the joy that a child is born into the world. So with you, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again. And you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. Jesus says, yes, you're right. In this world, you will have trouble. And yes, you're also right. I am leaving you, but that's not it. Because I'll see you again. Let those words sink in for a moment. Jesus says, your grief will turn into joy, and no one can take that away. You see, all of that joy is based on one thing, one unchangeable historical event: the empty tomb, the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus continues in chapter 14, verse 25, as he constantly reminds them that he is taking care of them. All this I have spoken while I am still with you. But the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you. Listen to this. Peace I leave you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. Jesus says, I am giving you joy and peace. A joy and a peace that the world cannot offer. Nothing in this world can provide you, Jesus says, what I can give you. And all of that joy and all of that peace goes back to one thing. This one moment in time, early on that Sunday morning, when that stone was rolled away. Jesus says, you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be afraid of anything the world throws at you. God doesn't intend for us to live in fear. Can bad things happen? Will bad things happen? Yes. Did bad things happen to Jesus' disciples to whom he is speaking? Yes. But they possessed this boldness as they processed through the lens of faith Jesus' words and what they saw when they saw the empty tomb, when they saw the risen Savior, when they processed that through eyes of faith, it changed everything for them. They were transformed into these bold, outspoken, faith-driven ambassadors of Christ. You see, their faith transcended their fear. And so Jesus tells them in this summary statement of his farewell to them why all of this is possible. John 14, verse 19. Before long, the world will not see me anymore, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. That's the whole point. Jesus says, because I live, you also will live. You will live, really live. Understand what life is supposed to be like. You will experience the abundant life. Life as God intended. Not just in heaven someday, certainly there. But you will begin to experience that even here. We don't have to be shackled by fear and plagued by anxiety. Jesus wanted them, and he wants us to embrace the joy and the peace that he provides because he is alive. You see, he was preparing his disciples for what would happen on that dreadful Friday night when he went to the cross. But he also didn't want them to live their lives like they were on Saturday after the cross, before the resurrection. And he doesn't want us to do that either. He doesn't want us to stay huddled behind locked doors in fear. Jesus is alive, and because he is alive, we also live. There are so many implications for that profound truth. There are so many things that fact, that truth, that reality changes for us. If we truly embrace it, if we truly believe it. We sometimes sing a song. In fact, we're going to sing it in just a few minutes. It's called Because He Lives. Even the title infers that there are some implications of the resurrection. Because He lives. The couple that wrote this song were going through sort of a difficult time when they wrote it. They were about to have, I believe, their third child, and they just sort of stopped and thought about the world in which they were bringing this child and the world that their kids were growing up in, and it scared them. And they were almost paralyzed by fear, and so they spent time in prayer. And through that prayer, they found a peace and the words to this song. It starts this way. God sent His Son. They called Him Jesus. He came to love, heal, and forgive. He lived and died to buy my pardon. An empty grave is there to prove my Savior lives. Because He lives, I can face tomorrow. Because He lives, all fear is gone. Because I know He holds the future. And life is worth the living just because He lives. Can you go and advance that slide? I want everyone to see these words. If you've been around church for a long time, you've probably sung these words for a long time. If you're new to church, maybe you've never even seen or heard about this song before. How many times have you sung these words and not let the meaning of those words change your life? That is a profound truth that changes everything. And sometimes I think we just go through the motions, especially when we're singing. And so I want you to think about these words. In fact, why don't we say them together out loud? Sometimes it helps to speak something. When we speak something, we're more likely to believe it. So would you just say these words out loud with me? Go to the next slide and we'll just do the chorus. Because He lives, I can face tomorrow. Because He lives, all fear is gone. Because I know He holds the future. And life is worth the living just because He lives. Isn't that the kind of faith that you want? Don't you want the kind of faith that allows you to face any tomorrow? It allows you to face any trouble this world throws at you, knowing full well that that future and this world is in the hands of God. Don't you want the kind of faith that makes all fear disappear? All anxiety disappear? You can have that faith. That's what God wants for you. That's why He rolled away the stone. That's why the tomb is empty. Because He lives, you can live. To me, one of the most heartwarming stories of this past year is something that came from all places out of college football. It's called the Iowa Wave. Maybe you've heard of it. University of Iowa plays their games in a stadium, and right outside the stadium, last year they just finished construction on the Children's Hospital, the University of Iowa's Children's Hospital. And this hospital towers over the east end of the stadium and gives the people in the hospital a bird's eye view of the field and the stadium. And through a grassroots effort on social media, the idea came up, hey, wouldn't it be neat if at some point in the game, people in the stadium acknowledge the children in the hospital? You see, the children in this hospital are, many of them, battling for their lives. Many different diseases and struggles. They are going through very difficult times. Well, this idea kind of sort of got momentum, and they said, yes, let's do this. And so from the very first home game, all throughout the season, right after the end of the first quarter, there's this pause. And everyone in the stadium looks up to the 12th floor where they have established this area for the children in the hospital and their immediate families to gather and watch the game. Everyone looks up and they wave. They wave to the kids. Can you imagine over 70,000 people turning to wave at these children who are struggling for their lives. And it's not just the hometown fans, it's the visiting fans, and it's not just the crowd, it's the players and the coaches. Everyone pauses to look up and wave to the kids. Many of the children look forward to this. It is the highlight of their week. And many of them can't stay in that area long enough to watch the whole game, but they will not miss the wave. And usually after the second quarter starts and the game keeps going, many of the kids and their families have to go back to their rooms. But left all across those windows are all these little handprints and all these little smudges of those children. One of those smudges belongs to a little boy named Will Cohn. Will was actually the very first kid in this hospital when it was finished last year. He was born with an underdeveloped heart and has since had a heart transplant, but his other organs began to shut down, and now he has to undergo over 17 hours a day of dialysis. Can you imagine? But he would not miss the wave. And after a week of difficulty and struggle, it is that moment that his parents see a smile on that boy's face when over 70,000 people are waving at him. You see, sometimes amid the struggle, we need to find hope. Sometimes we need reminders, especially when death is right in front of us or all around us. We need reminders that the world isn't just going on without us, that someone is thinking of us, that someone does care about us. At night games, many of the people in the stands turn on their phones or their flashlights and they shine them up. Can you imagine what that looks like? You see, we need those points of life or light in our life, don't we? We need those symbols, those reminders to let us know that there is hope, even in the struggle, even in the pain. There is hope and there is peace. We need to know that someone is thinking about us, that they haven't forgotten us. We all need that. Listen, the best reminder, the greatest symbol of hope, of assurance, of peace that we need to grab onto, the greatest point of light that can give us hope is that empty tomb. Even when you are facing death, don't miss the empty tomb. Because He lives, we too will live. This morning, if you're ready to give your life to the one who gave His life for you, to confess your faith that Jesus is Lord, to be baptized into Christ and begin a life lived to honor Him, we would love to help you with that. Or maybe we can pray for you, encourage you.